We're pleased to welcome now Mike McKenna, president of MWR Strategies and columnist with the Washington Times. Hey, Mike, thanks for coming on.
You betcha. Thanks for having me.
So we were just talking about all the activity just over the weekend coming out of the Trump administration. It makes it kind of hard for us folks in the media business to keep up with, but honestly, that's the way you want it. I mean, the president should be heads down working on just a wide range of issues. Right now, I'm watching live. You're probably aware of this. He's over in Saudi Arabia speaking at a Saudi-U.S. investment forum, and I'm seeing smiles as the camera pans across the prince and his entourage while the president is speaking. This is what a president should be doing, Mike.
Yeah, it's when I worked in the White House for the president, there was no such thing as an off day. There just wasn't. The day before Christmas and Christmas was about it. Everything else was live and working. So I have no idea how he does it. Right, I'm 20 years younger than him, and I just get tired just watching it sometimes.
It's fascinating. So let's talk about the trade deals. I mean, we got big news yesterday. Actually, broke Sunday that the U.S. and China, which was, I think, arguably the most difficult deal, perhaps the most important deal to work out. Now, the EU is a different story because they're so dysfunctional, and just negotiating with the EU makes that, the dysfunction makes it more difficult. But it looks like the president, Xi Jinping, worked something out. It kind of feels like we almost started back to where we were. So it's a little hard to tell with respect to the details, but your thoughts about this thing kind of coming to a head in a relatively short period of time?
Yeah, a deal with China was the president's white whale in the first go around, right? He imagines, and he may be right, that he's going to go back and sort of fix the most favored nation's mistake that we made in 1992, I guess, with the Chinese. And we're going to have a deal, and it's going to somehow constrain the Chinese. I certainly hope that's the way it works out, but we chase this mouse around the room for 4 years in the first term, and is Scott Bessent a different kind of guy? Yeah, maybe. I'm trying not to be pessimistic, but with the Chinese, it's they're pretty slippery.
Yeah,
how about if I say it that way?
Well, it's certainly not trustworthy. They've given us no reason to trust them. They really didn't comply with the original trade agreement that was cut, as you recall, in the first administration. That, by the way, affected Mississippi because of our agricultural community. That was a big part of that deal.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because I was going to have to say it if you didn't. Right? The phase one wasn't worth the paper it was printed on, and so I'm grateful that we're not in the middle of a trade war with the Chinese. I'm a little concerned that one thing Scott Bessent said that kind of concerned me is that neither side wants to decouple from the other. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm pretty confident about 60% of Americans wouldn't mind decoupling from the Chinese right now if they could. So.
Yeah. I mean, you can't do it immediately, but certainly getting that ball rolling, I think most Americans would like to see that, especially with respect, right, Mike, on our reliance on China to produce some critical goods, like for our military or prescription drugs that we so heavily rely on, most of which is actually made in China. So maybe we need a little decoupling and repatriation.
Yeah, I certainly think so, and forget what I think, right? When you talk to voters, they think it too, right? That Americans don't like being too reliant on any one people or a group of people. So, and especially folks who don't seem to mean their neighbors terribly well, right? And that kind of that fits in for the red Chinese, right? And keep in mind, Biden administration, first Trump administration identified the regime in Beijing as a genocidal regime, right? So
yeah.
It's probably the one or two things that Americans are really bipartisan on. Everybody's sort of thinking the same thing at the same way in the same tempo kind of thing.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, except who could forget Joe Biden? Was it when he was a candidate for vice president? He said, come on, folks, they're not bad folks, or something like that, talking about China.
I don't know how long your show is, but I guarantee you we could fill it with mistakes that Joe Biden made, right? It's just on the foreign policy stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That, right?
No, absolutely. No doubt about it. So what are your expectations on cutting some more trade deals? Scott Bessent, he's telling everybody we got several more. I think he said yesterday 28 are teed up and pretty close to closure.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna see a bunch, right? India, the EU's eventually going to come in line, right? Korea, Philippines, all these places. It's important. Two things are important to know. One is the direction on this is all positive, right? If you think about where we were a month and a half ago, everyone was like, "This is a disaster." Well, it doesn't. President Trump's a bit of a Houdini. Doesn't look quite like a disaster now. It looks like maybe we win, right? And then the other thing is we're going to spend a couple of years filling in the blanks a lot of these deals, right? And that's the tricky part of it, right? Is how long are those things going to take to land? And I think for most countries it's going to be a quick thing, but there's going to be 3 or 4 problem children, and you identified one of them right at the top, right? The EU is going to be a problem child. They just are.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, and they tend to be a little more arrogant about it. I actually think, Mike, that Trump's executive order essentially requesting the pharmaceutical companies to lower their prices and get in line with what they're charging other countries. And he specifically, as you know, he called out the EU. He said he doesn't like the fact that the EU is paying lower prices than America is, and to a great extent, we're sort of subsidizing their socialized medicine healthcare industry. And it seems to me that policy is as much about making them pay what we pay here as anything.
Yeah, I agree totally. And thank you for bringing that up, because I know a lot of people, kind of shy away from it. But yeah, the reality of it is that the world kind of free rides on American innovation, and that's it's bad. On the other hand, you don't want to kill the innovation off because it's saving lives, right? And I think the president gets that, and I think that's going to be one of the main sticking points with the EU, right, with the conversation, or the trade conversation with the EU, because as you point out, a lot of times the only thing the EU guys have is arrogance, and that's a huge problem, right?
Yep. It just seems like no matter what we're discussing and negotiating, their nose is in the air at us, and it shouldn't be, because let's be honest, without American innovation, there is no quality of life in the EU or the rest of the world. And I think the president rightfully asserts we're tired of bearing the cost of something that the entire world is benefiting from.
Yeah, I'm grateful he said that, right? I'm grateful he's going down this path. I'm a little nervous about where it turns out, right? Like I said, the one thing we don't want.
I agree.
We don't want to, yeah, and I think everybody agrees, right? You look at innovation, like how many lives are you saving? Right, thousands, tens of thousands every year, and I can't think of a family in the United States that isn't, which doesn't have someone whose life is being extended and preserved and made better by American pharmaceuticals, and that's the way it is, right? And I get it that we're getting unfairly treated. We need to get fairly treated, and we need to keep the innovation. I think the president's going to be the kind of guy who can make that thing happen.
I think you're right. I think more than anything, he's calling attention to the disparity there. Would you agree?
I agree. Which is why I don't worry about. I never worry about the president coming to the right answer. Sometimes I worry about his staff coming to the right answer, but I never worry about the president coming to the right answer.
And we could make the same argument about tariffs. He just exposed the disparity.
Yeah, and he's a bit of a showman, so it was a bit loud at the beginning, a bit confusing, a bit noisy, a bit like lots of bells and whistles going on, and then eventually it settled in. And like I said, here we are 6 weeks later, and I'll be damned if he wasn't right and the staff wasn't kind of nervous.
Yeah. You think the markets overreacted initially, Mike?
Yeah, I think so. My wife keeps a tracker on how much money we lost right for the first month or so. So she wasn't the only one, I suspect. But everyone's coming back to reality now, and that's super important. And you saw, I don't know what it closed at yesterday, but it was like 1,000 points up when I last looked. I probably shouldn't say this, but it's hard to take the market seriously sometimes, right? They're kind of little girls listening to gossip sometimes.
Well, especially when you consider how automated all that is and how much that moves markets without any human intervention whatsoever, just reacting to news inputs and sort of lacks that human discernment.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you 100% there.
Mike, we certainly appreciate you joining us. I look forward to talking to you some more in the future. Mike McKenna, president of MWR Strategies, also a columnist with the Washington Times. Take care, Mike. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. Folks, we're stepping aside for a break. We're in the Element Wealth studio.